Constructed from concrete and steel, stretching along the 280-mile French-German border, the Maginot Line was a daunting target for the German army. With their upcoming plans to invade France, it seemed inevitable that they would need the firepower necessary to blast their way past these numerous fortifications. While in reality it may not have prevented the eventual fall of France, the Maginot Line did leave a deep impact on German armored vehicle designs which persisted for some time even after the surrender. Programs for vehicles such as the Panzer I-F and Panzer II-J, as well as early heavy tank designs which eventually led to the Tiger, were heavily influenced by the fortifications of Germany's surrounding countries. Today, we will look at one such design created with the intent of being a dedicated bunker buster. This is the story of the 10.5cm armored self-propelled gun, more commonly known as the Dicker Max. Bunkers and other fortifications have been a vital part of conflicts for centuries, evolving from the walled cities and forts of the past to the concrete structures in more modern conflicts. They also feature as part of the gameplay in today's sponsor, Call of War. Call of War is a free online PvP strategy game set during the Second World War. Take control of a real-world nation and build tanks, planes, naval vessels, and secret weapons as you battle against up to 100 other players in real-time battles. I am a huge fan of the variety of vehicles represented in the game, even including lesser-known vehicles such as the M6 and Hummel. The game is also cross-platform, allowing you to play both at home on your PC and on the go with your mobile device, allowing you to keep the battle going wherever you are. Download the game and choose your strategy today using my link below and get an exclusive starter bonus of 13,000 gold and 1 month of premium subscription to get you started. This offer is only available for 30 days, so don't wait or you might miss it. Huge thanks to them for sponsoring. Now let's get back to our main topic. With the Maginot Line on their mind, development of heavy bunker-busting vehicles would begin in the late 1930s. Several weapons were considered for this role, with both the 10.5cm and 12.8cm cannons being potential candidates. The latter of these two would end up being used as the armament for the vehicle known as the Sture Emil, which I have covered in a previous video, but the 10.5cm would also be chosen for a design of its own. Unlike its bigger brother armed with the 12.8cm, which used a modified VK3001 hull, this 10.5cm armed design would use a more proven chassis, that being the one from the Panzer IV. With this, Krupp would begin development of this vehicle, presenting two proposed layouts on April 25, 1939. These were quite different from each other, with one featuring the engine in the rear of the vehicle and a lower mounting point for the gun, and the other having the engine mounted further forward beneath the gun. Of the two, the second one was favored as it allowed for a larger fighting compartment and less overhang from the barrel off the front of the vehicle. With that choice in mind, Krupp was to provide a revised drawing by the 15th of May. Yet more compromises were made as development continued, with the engine being changed from the 12-cylinder Maybach HL120 from the original Panzer IV to a significantly less powerful 6-cylinder HL66 engine. This was one of several choices made in an attempt to reduce the weight of the vehicle, with another being the use of the transmission from the VK901. Krupp would meet their deadline of the 15th, submitting their new proposal for a vehicle with a total weight of 22 tons. Approval for this design followed shortly after, with a wooden mock-up being requested. Another similar design was considered using a 6-wheeled torsion bar suspension, however, that added around 430 kilograms, 948 pounds. While interest was still shown in this and eventually a single test chassis was ordered, it would never actually be produced. As for the wooden mock-up, it was completed on the 19th of August 1939. While no photos of this exist, we can assume based on some of the requested changes that the design at this point was already quite similar to what the final vehicle would look like. The main changes requested were a reduction of the inside hull width by 100mm and shifting of the crew compartment floor 100mm lower. With those and some other changes in mind, Krupp was finally presented with a contract for 2 prototypes along with the binding design guidelines for them. This consists of a basic description of the vehicle with a 10.5cm L51 cannon with a muzzle brake using 2-piece ammunition, Maybach HL66 engine connected to a VG15319 transmission, 5-man crew, and an open fighting compartment mounted atop the Panzer IV chassis. With the planned armor protection being 30 to 50 mm frontally with 20 mm on the side, the total weight of the SPG was to be limited to 20 metric tons. Despite this, however, prior to the construction of the prototypes, the decision for the transmission changed gears suddenly with the decision to instead use the SSG-46 transmission from the Panzer II and the steering unit from the Panzer IV. This seems to have been at least partially due to both already being in production and the steering unit having already been proven for the Panzer IV. The VK901 and VK902 program itself would suffer far more from this inability to make a decision on the transmission, with that project seeing numerous systems tested, driving production to a standstill. But that's a story for another day. As for the Dicker Max, this change came with some major drawbacks, as the gear ratio of the new transmission caused the estimated maximum speed to plummet from 35 km per hour to 25 km per hour, or around 15 miles per hour. When combined with the final combat weight of the vehicle being 22 metric tons, this resulted in significantly worse mobility from the initial plans for the self-propelled gun. While this was not much of a concern if used against static fortifications, the same cannot be said for other targets. Production of the first 2 trial vehicles of the Dicker Max was expected to be completed by August of the following year, with a prospective order for 100 to follow. It would not be until January of 1941 that the 2 were actually completed, though. These would be presented to Hitler at a demonstration on the 31st of March 1941, and despite the delay, the order for a production run of the vehicles was planned for spring 1942, pending the results of troop trials. It was also around this time, in August of 1941, that the designation of the vehicles would go from 10cm Kanon Panzerselbstfahrerfette 4A to 10.5cm Kanone Gepanzert Selbstfahrerfette. Do note that despite the change from 10cm to 10.5cm in the name, the gun was the same for both. The name Dicker Max, which translates to Fat Max or Thicker Max, seems to have appeared later. For the sake of simplicity, I will use that name for the remainder of the video. Unfortunately for the Dicker Max, by this point, combat in the West had finished an entire year before they were completed, meaning they were no longer needed for their originally intended purpose. However, with the invasion of the USSR only weeks away, their powerful guns could be put to work against new targets, those being Soviet tanks. Tanks such as the KV series heavy tanks and T-34s proved quite resistant to the German guns during the early invasion, but with the 10.5cm cannon, they would be able to make short work of such vehicles. Their introduction to combat would occur not long after the invasion began, with the 2 self-propelled guns now being assigned as tank destroyers as part of Panzerjäger Abteilung 521. Arriving with the unit sometime just before the beginning of the invasion, their first foray into combat would come just 1 day after the operation began. Starting on the 23rd of June, the 2 tank destroyers would fire against groups of infantry as well as anti-tank guns and artillery. After roughly a week of this, they would engage their first armored target, that being, of all things, an armored train. Due to a mechanical failure, this mission would result in failure as the Dicker Max arrived 5 minutes too late, with the train pulling away and out of the line of fire. Things would only get worse for the Dicker Max in the days following, with one of the 2 having a catastrophic failure. This occurred as the crew was making their way to Sluk along a road on a particularly hot day. While the open top may have provided some relief for the crew compared to their fellow tankers, the same cannot be said for their vehicle, which caught fire and promptly exploded. The exact cause of this was not determined in the report, but according to the crew, they saw flames shooting out of the cartridge storage prior to the explosion. It seems likely that a combination of the heat of the day with the heat from the engine may have caused the ammo to cook off. Whatever the case, this completely destroyed the Dickermax, which was slowly picked apart for spare parts in the following weeks. The crew were lucky enough to escape with their lives, bailing out of the vehicle. The remaining Dickermax would continue in service after this, eventually getting the chance to engage armored targets in late August. As expected of a vehicle fitted with such a powerful gun, it had little difficulty engaging those, with 3 of the tanks in the column being knocked out, although it was not clear if the 10.5cm gun was responsible for this. Interestingly, the action report notes that the first tank was engaged with a high explosive shell as that was already loaded, and upon inspection, this may have damaged the tracks of the enemy tank. This success continued into the following months, with the Dickermax engaging and either knocking out or completely destroying several heavy tanks. These engagements would provide valuable information about the performance of the tank destroyer, with complaints primarily being made in regards to the mobility. Not only was the speed poor, making it incapable of being part of lead units, but when combined with the limited traverse of 18 degrees, this made it difficult to fire on moving targets, as it required the entire vehicle to be repositioned if the target moved out of the gun's arc. It was also noted that the blast from the muzzle brake caused it to be impossible for the crew to observe where their shot landed. To resolve this, either an observation post would be needed to direct shots, or multiple vehicles would need to work together to direct their fire. Another more minor issue was found with the steering brake, which is also identified as the failure which delayed the engagement with the armored train. Despite these issues though, the vehicle was available and effective, so it remained in combat until the end of the year, when it was then pulled out of service and returned to Krupp for repairs and rebuilding. The surviving Dickermax would return to combat the following year in June, now joined by the 12.8cm armed Stura Emils. With the potential for a production order having come and gone, this species of Panzer would go extinct by the end of 1942, presumably being lost in combat or from a breakdown somewhere near Stalingrad. In what is believed to be the last known surviving photo of the vehicle, it is shown with 18 kill marks on the barrel being inspected by a Soviet soldier. Following that, the Dickermax disappeared, with it seemingly being scrapped after its capture. Overall, the Dickermax, while promising as a weapon for destroying fortifications and armored targets, proved to be held back by the many concessions made during its development. Had it been given a more powerful engine, perhaps it would have impressed the Army Design Office enough to warrant full-scale production, but it could just as likely have suffered the same fate regardless. The time spent on this design was not wasted though, as the information gathered from their time in combat would prove to be very useful for development of new designs like the Nashorn. But what do you think about the Dickermax? Was it a good design held back by compromises, or is it another example of a German wonder weapon doomed to fail? Let me know in the comments, and while you're there, be sure to like the video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe for more. Don't forget to also give Call of War a try to get your free bonus for being a viewer of the channel. Huge thanks to them for supporting these videos, and to all of you for watching. One final thanks to all these awesome people who support the channel as YouTube members. I really appreciate it. If you enjoyed this video, check out my other video on the Stura Emil and learn about another failed German project. Hope to see you there.